November 18, 1993. Sony Music Studios, New York City. Kurt Cobain sat down for what would become the most haunting performance in MTV Unplugged history. But when he insisted on ending with a lead belly song about death, everyone in that studio realized they weren't watching a concert. They were watching a farewell. The most chilling part, he looked directly into the camera during the final song with an expression that made the director stop filming. But before I tell you what Kurt whispered to Dave Grohl between songs that was caught on the studio mics, you need to understand why this performance was different from every other MTV Unplugged session. Because what happened in that studio wasn't just an acoustic concert, it was Kurt Cobain's way of saying goodbye to the world while millions watched. And nobody understood until it was too late. The Sony Music Studios on West 54th Street had hosted dozens of MTV Unplugged sessions. Eric Clapton, Neil Young, Mariah Carey, they'd all sat on that same stage with acoustic guitars and stripped-down arrangements. But from the moment Nirvana's crew arrived, everyone knew this would be different. Kurt was in a strange mood, recalled Alex Coletti, the show's producer. Most artists come in excited, nervous maybe. Kurt seemed resigned, like he was attending his own funeral. The problem started immediately. MTV wanted Nirvana to play their hits. Smells Like Teen Spirit, Come As You Are, Lithium. Kurt refused. Instead, he submitted a set list that read like a suicide note set to music. 6 covers, most of them about death, isolation, and saying goodbye. The MTV executives were horrified. "This isn't what people want to hear," one executive told Kurt during rehearsal. Kurt's response chilled everyone in the room. "It's what I need to say," he replied, his blue eyes vacant. "Take it or leave it." The stage setup was Kurt's idea, too. While most Unplugged performances were bright and intimate, Kurt demanded they make it look like a funeral parlor. Black candles, stargazer lilies, the flowers used at funerals, and dim lighting that cast shadows across his gaunt face. When the set designer asked why he wanted it so dark, Kurt said something that nobody understood until 5 months later. "I want it to look like how I feel inside," he said. "Like something beautiful is dying." The rehearsal the night before was a disaster. Kurt was dope-sick, sweating through his green cardigan, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his guitar. He kept forgetting lyrics to his own songs, but remembered every word of the obscure covers he'd chosen. At one point he stopped mid-song and stared at the empty seats where the audience would be. "Do you think they'll understand?" he asked Dave Grohl. "Understand what?" Dave responded. Kurt didn't answer. He just kept staring at those empty seats, like he could see ghosts. The day of the taping, November 18th, Kurt arrived at 3 p.m. for the 5 p.m. call time. He was early, which was unusual. He spent those 2 hours alone in his dressing room, writing in his journal. A production assistant who brought him tea said she saw pages covered with the same phrase over and over. "I'm not what you think I am." When it was time to perform, Kurt walked onto the stage slowly, like each step hurt. The small invited audience, about 150 people, applauded, but Kurt didn't acknowledge them. He sat down, adjusted his guitar, and looked up at the cameras with an expression that made several people in the audience later say they felt cold. "This is called About a Girl," Kurt said into the microphone, his voice barely above a whisper. But those who knew the song's history knew it was about wanting to be someone else, anyone else, rather than who you were. The performance that followed was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Kurt's voice, usually aggressive and raw, was vulnerable, almost fragile. He sang like someone saying goodbye to everything they'd ever loved. Between songs, instead of the usual banter, Kurt would go completely silent, staring at his guitar like it held answers to questions nobody was asking. It was during The Man Who Sold the World, the David Bowie cover, that things got strange. The lyrics, "I gazed a gazeless stare, we walked a million years," seemed to transform Kurt. His voice cracked on the line, "Who knows? Not me. I never lost control." Dave Grohl later said it was the only time he'd ever seen Kurt cry while performing, though the dim lighting hid it from the cameras. But it was what happened between Pennyroyal Tea and Dumb that really showed Kurt's state of mind. The cameras were still rolling, but MTV edited this part out. Kurt turned to Dave and Chris and said, "Loud enough for the boom mics to pick up. After I'm gone, I want you to remember this. This is how I want it to be seen. Not the other thing." Dave, confused, asked, "What other thing?" Kurt just shook his head and launched into Dumb, a song about feeling stupid and contagious, about being happy because you're too numb to feel anything else. The Meat Puppets joined them for 3 songs, but even they noticed something was wrong. Kurt Kirkwood later recalled, "Kurt kept apologizing to us, saying he was sorry for bringing us into this. We thought he meant the performance, but looking back, I think he meant something else entirely." When it came time for the final song, Kurt made a decision that would become legendary. He chose "Where Did You Sleep Last Night?", an old, lead-belly song about death, betrayal, and darkness. MTV wanted him to do an encore after it. Kurt refused. "This is the last song," he said firmly. "There's nothing after this." The performance of "Where Did You Sleep Last Night" that followed was so intense, so raw, that several people in the audience started crying without knowing why. Kurt's voice built from a whisper to a scream, his face contorting with an emotion that was beyond pain, beyond sadness. It was like watching someone exorcise a demon, but it was the ending that haunts everyone who was there. In the final moments of the song, Kurt screamed the last line, "I would shiver the whole night through," then opened his eyes and stared directly into the camera. The look in his eyes was so disturbing that MTV's director, Beth McCarthy, later said she instinctively yelled "cut," even though they were supposed to keep rolling. "It was like looking into the eyes of someone who had already decided to die," McCarthy recalled. "I've directed hundreds of performances, but I've never seen anything like that. It wasn't performance, it was a confession." After the camera stopped, Kurt sat there for a full minute, not moving, not speaking. The audience, unsure if the show was over, remained silent. Finally, Kurt stood up, set his guitar down downly, almost reverentially, and walked off stage without a word. Backstage, the mood was strange. Usually after an unplugged taping, there was celebration, congratulations, but everyone seemed subdued, unsettled. Kurt sat alone in his dressing room, while the executives in Ruhr mingled outside. Janet Billig, who was there representing Nirvana, went to check on him. "I found him sitting in the dark," she recalled. "I asked if he was okay. He looked at me and said, 'I just played my funeral. How do you think I feel?'" She thought he was being dramatically poetic. 5 months later, she realized he was being literal. The most revealing moment came when Kurt was leaving. As he walked past the MTV crew, several of them congratulated him on the performance. Kurt stopped and turned to them with an expression that multiple witnesses described as profound sadness. "I hope you got what you needed," he said, "because I can't do this again." Everyone assumed he meant he wouldn't do another unplugged session. They didn't understand he meant he couldn't keep pretending to be alive when he already felt dead. In the car ride back to the hotel, Kurt said something to Pat Smear that wouldn't make sense until after April 1994. "When I'm gone, I want this to be what people remember, not the screaming, not the anger. This, the real me. The me that's too tired to keep fighting." Pat, uncomfortable with the conversation, tried to lighten the mood. "You're not going anywhere, man." Kurt looked out the window at the New York lights passing by. "We're all going somewhere, Pat. Some of us just know where." The performance aired on MTV on December 16, 1993. It was immediately hailed as one of the best unplugged sessions ever recorded. Critics praised Kurt's vulnerability, his artistic choices, the haunting beauty of the stripped-down arrangements. What they didn't realize was that they were praising a suicide note performed live on television. Dave Grohl, in an interview years later, said, "Watching it now, it's so obvious. The song choices, the flowers, the way he performed, it was all Kurt telling us he was saying goodbye. We just didn't want to hear it." Chris Novoselic added, "He turned that MTV studio into a funeral parlor and performed his own eulogy, and we all sat there and applauded." The Unplugged album, released after Kurt's death, became Nirvana's best-selling album. It won a Grammy, It's considered one of the greatest live albums ever recorded. But for those who were in the studio that night, it's something else entirely. It's evidence, said Beth McCarthy. Evidence that Kurt told us exactly what he was planning to do. He sat in front of cameras and a live audience and showed us his death wish through every song choice, every gesture, every word. We just thought it was art. The camera operator who filmed the close-up during Where Did You Sleep Last Night later revealed something that was never made public. In the final frame just before Beth called cut, Kurt mouthed two words directly into the camera. The tape was reviewed frame by frame after his death, and those who saw it swear he said, "I'm sorry." MTV keeps the unedited footage in their vault. The few people who have seen the complete, uncut version say there are moments too personal, too raw to ever be released. Moments where Kurt forgot he was performing and simply existed in his pain. Moments where the mask slipped completely and revealed someone who had already made peace with dying. Today, when music historians analyze that unplugged performance, they point to it as Kurt's greatest artistic achievement. But for those who were there, who saw him transform that studio into a confession booth, who heard the things he said between songs that were edited out, who saw the look in his eyes during that final song, they know what it really was. It was Kurt Cobain's last will and testament, performed live for millions to see. A 14-song suicide note that everyone heard but nobody understood. He told the world he was dying, and the world applauded, thinking it was just another brilliant performance. The stargazer lilies he insisted on for the stage, they're the same flowers Courtney would place on his coffin 5 months later. The green cardigan he wore, he was wearing it when they found his body. The final song about shivering the whole night through, his body was discovered in the greenhouse in the cold Seattle morning. Kurt Cobain didn't just perform on MTV Unplugged. He conducted his own funeral service, delivered his own eulogy, and said goodbye to the world in the only way he knew how, through music. And just like he predicted, it became what people remember. Not the screaming electric shows, but this quiet, haunting farewell that was hiding in plain sight. The tragedy isn't just that Kurt died. It's that he told us he was going to, sang it to us song by song on national television, looked directly into our eyes, through the camera and showed us his pain, and we called it entertainment. We gave it a Grammy. We made it platinum. But for those who were in that studio on November 18, 1993, who felt the cold that seemed to emanate from the stage, who saw Kurt's eyes when he opened them during that final song, they know they witnessed something far more profound than a concert. They witnessed a soul saying goodbye.